So we're tackling the second half of the book of Daniel. So give us a background. What's different between the first half and the second half? Is that an artificial designation?
No, it really isn't. Now, I will say this. Always remember that chapter and verse divisions are, by definition, an artificial distinction, because the only book in the Bible that had any numerical identification is the book of Psalms. The first half is sometimes called historical. Others just call it the stories of kings, because it's Daniel and his interaction with the kings. And then the second half are these visions. The other thing that makes it interesting as a book is that it's the only book that combines Aramaic and Hebrew. And I mean, you'll find other places in the Old Testament where there'll be an Aramaic quote or an Aramaic phrase or verse, but it kind of bounces around in the book of Daniel, both in the first 7 chapters and the last half, where parts of it are in Hebrew, parts of it are in Aramaic. Looking at it at the heart of it, it's the message of the whole Old Testament. It's saying, based on those stories, it's building up, it's saying, doesn't matter who's in charge. It doesn't matter what king is on the throne. All those kings and all those kingdoms are going to go away, and the fulfillment of God's kingdom on earth.
It seems like, the first half of Daniel, he's interpreting dreams or visions for other people, maybe specifically Nebuchadnezzar and his son.
Right.
But now it's kind of like, okay, now we're giving dreams to you, Daniel. And so the second half, he's seeing stuff and it's freaking him out, and he writes it down.
When he erupts into almost poetry or song lyrics in a couple of times in chapter 7.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's right out of Revelation chapter 7.
Yeah. And of course, he didn't have Jesus interpreting Daniel. He just had this stuff straight from God and laid it out there. And it's funny because he lays it out there.
I would suggest that it's more apocalyptic than the book of Revelation, because Revelation is set up, and there's different ways of looking at it, but it sets it up and says there's 7 churches here. Here are the letters to those 7 churches. Here are some of the issues. Here are some of the things. And then he goes on. In Daniel, he tells these stories, these radical stories of God's sovereignty over these earthly, monarchs and kings, followed by now this cascading set of visions that seem to be shouting out the same thing. They're all going to go, and God's kingdom is going to be established. That's about as eschatological as you can get. That is the eschaton, which is the Greek word for the last things.
He almost seems to not know what to do with this stuff he's getting. He just writes it down. The angel interprets some of it, but he just gets it out there. And I envision him just saying, I don't know what that was. It freaked me out. But there it is. And now, everybody gets to sort through this for the next 400 or 500 years until Jesus comes, because it's out there.
And for that matter, it influenced, and we'll probably talk about it later, but that time when he says near the end of the book, we're going to shut it up. We're just going to close it and put it on the shelf. And at some point, somebody's going to figure out what this stuff is.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can't help but attach that to the seals being opened in Revelation. I guess it's 4, or maybe it's
absolutely.
It's interesting what you said to me, that Daniel is perhaps more relating to the end times, to the final age, than even Revelation. Of course, it's also related to the present age, because he's talking about current kingdoms, and it's not redactionary. Some people say, well, this stuff is so specific about the next 4 kingdoms, next 4 primary world players, that obviously it was written after this happened. And
right.
They threw Daniel's name on it.
Or people that say, well, it was written beforehand, then find little areas of minutia where it may not have been quite as precisely describing it. And this is from an old, one of my Old Testament textbooks from Fuller Seminary decades ago. And I love this phrase. He says, remember, these details are not historically precise, The book of Daniel is neither history written in advance nor prophecy after the event. It is apocalyptic, which is always transhistorical. It seems to spring from history, but its purpose goes beyond history and provides a timeless message. And I think that's so well stated. Yes, it springs out of true historical events, but its intention was not to write a historical journal ahead of time. It was to, from the history of it, spring out to this message to all of us that, again, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, to quote Handel.
I'm going to begin by quoting from chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, just for a big picture look at what he's doing. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. What's it talking about there?
Well, clearly it's setting us up to know that Jesus, the Son of Man, and Jesus used that phrase about himself many times in the Gospels. This is so clearly he is seeing and he is declaring the coming of Jesus, when his dominion will be an everlasting dominion. His all peoples, nations, language. I mean, that's Revelation 7, of course. But what people get, what they stumble over, if you're looking kind of from this vantage point, you're seeing this prophecy, and then there's another prophecy that kind of bunches them up, and you don't see what could be a chasm of time in between. And so that's why in the Vineyard we always use that phrase that was made popular by George Eldon Ladd, the already and the not yet of the kingdom. It's not yet. I mean, the reality is the culmination of God's kingdom has not occurred and happened yet, because there is still crying and mourning and war and sickness and and all those things. However, this says that when his dominion comes, as it did when he said it is finished on the cross, and he went, was resurrected up to the right hand of the Father, that we are already beginning to have some of the actual benefits of that future kingdom now. So we're in the already and the not yet.
Yeah.